All right. Well, thank you everyone for coming out tonight. We really appreciate having you here for our second Investing in Infrastructure Community meeting. So the village board and staff are all really excited to get your feedback and also to continue to help educate the public on the issues that we're facing as a community currently and in the coming years ahead. With me today, I'm Mayor David Plessy. For those of you who haven't met me before, I'm very happy to have two trustees with me tonight, Trustee Della Penna and Trustee Prokowski as well. So tonight you'll be hearing from myself as well as a number of staff members. And so as we go through the night, we'll have a moment for us to have questions. And so hold those thoughts and whatnot, and we'll come back around to those at those designated times. So we're going to cover kind of an overview of all the infrastructure and the issues that the village is facing at this time, and then talk about how we go about doing infrastructure improvements in our community. We'll then walk you through how we fund for infrastructure and then the tools that are available to us to help increase that funding to fill those gaps that we have. Throughout the evening, we'll have a number of audience check-ins, so that way we will continue to get your feedback, but also answer your questions. We've refined this for those of you who are at our first infrastructure meeting a little bit based on the feedback we got from that crowd. So you'll have some new information as well as some new information to digest throughout the process as well. So how do we get to this situation where we're asking you for support? I think the biggest thing is we had a lot of growth in our community in the 1980s. And if you think about the average lifespan of a lot of infrastructure, it's now starting to come to the end of its useful lifespan. And with that comes the fact that as a community, we are very proud of how we've budgeted. And sometimes when we talk about conservatively budgeting, that doesn't always mean that we are keeping up with the costs that we know we need to pay for. A lot of times we're doing that through flat annual funding or by deferring annual maintenance, which, as we know on our house, if we wait to fill a crack in our roof, that can go into a bigger leak that causes more structural damage and cause a bigger expense down the road. And so while we were trying to be good stewards of our money overall over the last couple of decades, there's a point where we need to address some of these bigger concerns. There's also another kind of element to this beyond what we've done, but also there's market influences that have impacted the village. Numerous Illinois EPA regulations have been approved recently, and those require us to increase the capacity or how we treat water in the village. And these are good things in general. Like, I think we can all agree we want safe, clean water, but there's a cost associated. And a lot of times these new mandates are unfunded, unfortunately. So we have to figure out a way to fill the gap between what we have today and what is required of us in the future. And I think finally, all of us in our own homes have experienced the impacts of inflation. Costs have gone up. The pandemic has changed the material market, the labor market as well. And so the government's not immune to these challenges as well. And so while we have continued to do our best, there's a lot of pressures on us that are adding up to a point where we need to think creatively about how we solve this problem before this becomes a crisis for our community. So our approach has been to continue to engage the community in forums like this, as well as to make strategic decisions that set us up for future success as a community. In 2022, the board and myself approved a new strategic plan, which our 5 principles are included on the right here. And we focused a lot on how do we continue to position the village to be in a better position in the future. And so through being good financial stewards, growing the tax base, finding new businesses, using tools to help promote economic activity, focusing on redevelopment to fuel things that it's not only on our homeowners to pay for these things, trying to make sure our infrastructure is reliable for the future and not just worrying about today's needs and thinking about the future needs as well. Working towards operational sustainability. And I think sustainability is the key word here, right? We know that we can deliver good services today, but how do we make this easier for the next generation? We don't want to have another crisis that we're trying to solve down the road. So what's going to be the solution that's going to be long-term success for our community? And finally, customer experience. Because at the end of the day, even though we're government and you're the residents here, you really are our customers, right? We want to keep you satisfied. And we know there's going to be trends that are going to encourage us to go in maybe different directions. So how can we adapt to make sure that you're getting more bang for your buck from us as a service? We've also gone through and pursued a lot of different technical things that are available to us. We've mentioned the IEPA. They have a lot of loan programs as well. And so there's things that we can do where we can borrow and have some of those loans forgiven. But when we're talking about the scale of projects that we're about to discuss, that's not going to fill our gap. We've also been advocating for us to receive additional funds through the Legislative Distributive Fund, or the LGDF. Essentially, in a nutshell, the state of Illinois, I think, was a smart state. Back when we had the Constitutional Convention in the 70s, the state decided, we just want to have one income tax. And that's what we do today. You pay your federal income tax and your state income tax. A lot of states, they actually have a local municipal income tax. And so in Illinois, I think this is something we did that was really great, but that was built on a promise from the General Assembly that they would reserve 10% of the income tax to go back to your local community. And when we had financial troubles in the state of Illinois, they reduced that percentage. So we only get a fraction of that money since the 2010s. So we've been continuing to advocate with Springfield, but as I think we can all understand, Springfield is kind of a beast in and of itself, right? And so while we advocate, we work with other communities, we haven't had much success. I think last year we had a 0.16% increase in our LGF distribution. So we're finding other ways that we can make up this gap, but we know we need to do more, and we don't want to let this be kicked down the can to become a problem. We want to solve this today. So when we talk about infrastructure, there's a lot of different things that go into that. There's things that we see every day, and there's things that continue to go on underneath the surface that we don't understand or see. So when we think about it, there's streets and sidewalks. In the village, we have over 74 miles of streets. We also have light poles. We have over 600 light poles in this village that we maintain. Interesting enough, there's only one stoplight that we actually own and operate. So that's a fun fact as you drive around. A lot of those are county or state ones. We only have one. But we also have a very extensive water system with miles and miles of pipes to deliver water to your house, as well as to collect your wastewater too. So after you flush the toilet, you take a shower, all that water needs to come back to one of our treatment plants. And we have 2 of those that we maintain and update regularly. We also have stormwater infrastructure that helps collect rain runoff so it can help reduce flooding or at least manage its slow release back into this kind of stormwater system naturally. And then we also have buildings and grounds like Village Hall, the police station. We have a lot of buildings that we have to maintain for staff to work and deliver services. So all 5 of these categories is what we're kind of focusing on. And we're going to put special emphasis on streets and sidewalks today, while also talking about our water system and wastewater treatment and stormwater as well. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to our Assistant Public Works Director, Kristen Meal, to talk about our infrastructure improvements.
A little shorter, sorry. Thank you, David. I'm Kristen Mail. I'm the Assistant Director of Public Works and Village Engineer. So before we start talking about streets and sidewalks, we do need to discuss our wastewater treatment plants and our water systems, which are the main drivers for our need for more financial support. If you attended the March Forum, you may remember that the necessary updates to our wastewater treatment facilities are a significant factor in our need for greater financial support. Both our treatment plants need significant updates and expansion to meet the new IEPA mandates on nutrient removal from wastewater. Additionally, both treatment plants are reaching a critical point in their life cycle and need equipment and facility updates to keep up with the community's demand for wastewater treatment. On the water side, we're also working to comply with IEPA mandates on the lead service line removal from our system, which is also another unfunded mandate. Unfunded mandates mean that we don't receive any financial support in order to meet these regulations, and we have to come up with all of the funding for these ourselves. In all, these water and wastewater projects are estimated to cost approximately $80 million. To cover the loans the village will need to complete these projects, we must generate an additional $4.5 million in annual revenue. Another aspect of infrastructure that's critical for us to manage is stormwater. Stormwater improvements help reduce flooding both on roadways and on private property. We're currently working on stormwater studies and preliminary design in 3 areas of the village that are shown in red on this slide. As the studies and preliminary designs are completed, we will be able to enter into the final design, engineering, and permitting phases that will prepare these areas for future construction. Stormwater mitigation projects are expensive, however, and the work identified in these 3 areas is anticipated to cost about $30 million. We may be able to get FEMA funding for these projects, and we will do what we can to apply for those funds. So while we're not going to talk in detail about stormwater, wastewater, or water today, it's important that we share this information with you so that you can understand the scope and expense of maintaining all of our community's infrastructure. One way that the village maintains all of our infrastructure throughout the community is through annual programs. We have 4 annual street and sidewalk maintenance programs that help ensure safe travel for both drivers and pedestrians throughout the village. Through the annual sidewalk program, the village addresses sidewalks that present tripping hazards, drainage concerns, or do not meet ADA standards. The village board approved changes to this program in 2014 to improve overall sidewalk infrastructure in the community. This program divided the village's public sidewalks into 4 zones and identified high pedestrian traffic areas located near schools, parks, churches, nursing homes, commuter parking lots, and commercial retail districts. Since 2015, the village has completed inspections, grinding, and replacement in these high traffic areas, and in addition to 1 zone each year. There are 3 major components of the sidewalk program. The first is the sidewalk grinding of trip hazards. This goes through a quarter of the town each year in addition to those high traffic zones that were previously talked about. Polyjacking is used to raise concrete that's sunk either due to soil conditions or other factors. Sidewalk removal and replacement is done in areas where ADA compliance is an issue and where other other methods may not resolve the situation. The program at this time is only reactive, and we don't replace sidewalk based on age or condition alone. The village also replaces streetlights regularly throughout the village. Most of the poles in the village are made of concrete, which deteriorates over time due to salt and other environmental factors. Regular replacement keeps the light poles not only looking nice, but also functioning so that they're safe for motorists and pedestrians. The annual street improvement program and maintenance programs include several different kinds of projects to keep our roadways in good condition. The first component is the resurfacing and reconstruction of streets. Ongoing maintenance is addressed by Public Works, repairing potholes and patching areas as needed and identified by both the public and our crews. Additionally, the village performs annual pavement preservation, which includes crack filling and pavement rejuvenation to help extend the roadway's life. Thermoplastic pavement markings, which delineate things like bike lanes, crosswalks, stop bars, are replaced on a 3-year cycle. Even if your street is not included in the annual improvement program, you can still let us know about issues you see on your street so we can address them. You can submit a Public Works request, as noted at the bottom of this slide. You can submit these 24 hours a day, and they will let us know about things like potholes, flooded streets, sidewalks that could use an inspection, or trees, things like that. One of the questions we get frequently is, how does the village prioritize a sidewalk or a street improvement? For the street improvements, we consider a variety of factors. The first is the results of our most recent pavement study. This last study was done in 2019, and it looks at both what's going on the surface of the roadway as well as underneath the surface. The surface condition is analyzed by a laser camera on the front of a specialized vehicle that identifies things like cracks and potholes. Specialized equipment also is used to determine the condition of the base and the subbase of the pavement to help identify pavement conditions that may not be seen through a visual or surface-only inspection. We also consider how much traffic a roadway receives and utility improvements that may be needed in the area, including water main replacement, storm sewer improvements, or sanitary sewer replacement. We also, again, are based some of our needs on observations by staff and residents. For the sidewalk program, we look at unsafe conditions or trip hazards, drainage concerns or sidewalks that hold water, and ADA compliance issues at intersections. There are several roadways in the village, it's important to note, that are maintained by Cook County, DuPage County, or IDOT. Village staff works with these entities to ensure that the roadways are maintained and to coordinate on large projects, but we do not maintain them ourselves. Our 2023 annual street improvement program will begin at the end of this month on 11 sections of local streets that are listed on this slide. Residents in these areas have been notified, but anyone can view the program and the weekly construction updates online through the village's website or the QR link shown on this slide. I'm guessing it's also in your packet as well. Also shown here in the other gray circle is the link to where you can submit a Public Works request, as we talked about.
Thank you so much, Kristen. So during this section, we covered our 4 different main infrastructure maintenance programs that we do on an annual basis and went through kind of how we prioritize projects and identify them. So We'll open up to questions now at this time. We just ask that, if you have a question, since we are recording this, please use the microphone so that way the people back at home can understand you. And then just keep it to 2 minutes or less. That way everyone, even though I know we don't have a packed audience here today, everyone has a chance to talk just in case. So if anyone has a question, raise your hand and we'll get you the microphone. All right. We have plenty of other opportunities. So, sorry. Yeah, absolutely. Let's get you the microphone.
Hi, I had a question about when you guys plan on doing the going through the streets and sidewalks and looking at again when they need to be updated. I don't know how often is the process.
Yeah, Kristen.
So the sidewalks at quarter of the town is done every year. So we evaluate all the sidewalks every 4 years. Regarding the streets, we intend to budget for a pavement evaluation either in 2024 or 2025, which will look at every street within the village. Typically, that's done on a 3 to 5 year cycle.
And then also, I was wanted to ask, have you guys looked into any permeable pavements and anything related to that? I know it costs more, but it's good for water infrastructure and flooding mitigation.
It really isn't something that we've looked into at this time. There are significant maintenance concerns in addition to the increased upfront cost, but it's not something that we're opposed to in the right application in the future.
And I think the one thing I would add too is, as we'll get to next, we have funding constraints and we probably should be maintaining or resurfacing more roads than we are today. And so I think we need to get ourselves back up to a regular cycle and schedule, and then we can start to, once we get stabilized, look at more innovative things like that. So any other questions from the audience? All right, then I'll invite up our village administrator, Jason Belowski, to talk about funding infrastructure. The fun is where it starts to get fun.
Set the bar very high, David. Thank you. As David said, I'm the village administrator, so I'd like to cover how our board and village funds infrastructure through its annual budget process and the programs that are in place. My fat thumbs, I think, hit 2 buttons at the same time. Okay, sorry about that. So as this graphic shows, and I think to reiterate from our previous presentation as well, where the primary source of funding for infrastructure is not property tax. Your property tax does not fund infrastructure, it funds operations. We get roughly $6 million in property tax. Our general operations are about $21 million, so property taxes, a third to a quarter of our actual operation covers our operation costs. So from an infrastructure improvement perspective, we're talking about other taxes and fees that are collected or distributed to the village. And some of those fees, as the slide shows, are from a utility tax perspective. That's a locally administered tax via local ordinance. That money through the budget process is allocated towards general capital projects. Those are taxes on telephone, natural gas, electricity are the sources from the utility tax perspective. And as shown there, that's really for streets, sidewalks, streetlights, stormwater, and buildings and grounds, with the primary source of street funding coming through the state collected motor fuel tax. That tax is remitted back to municipalities on a per capita basis. We don't have really any control over that. That is fully dictated by the state of Illinois and how much they collect, how they remit it to us. And some of the challenges facing with that, as we know, as there's a big push on eliminating cars from consuming gasoline and instead running on electricity, those are some of the challenges that I think our state and ourselves will be facing, that this revenue source likely will be declining while our needs are certainly increasing. Other sources of funding that the village has and seeks for our infrastructure Some of this is a little nuanced, but we do seek and have obtained federal funding for streets. There's certain limitations on what that federal funding can be used towards. Those are federal funds administered through the state of Illinois. So this technically the state of Illinois is the grant recipient and administers those federal funds. We have funds currently allocated to the village for the Rodenberg Road project in reconstructing and resurfacing that road. In the past, we've secured that funding, that surface transportation funding for Central Avenue, Maple Avenue. So where we can, we have sought grants and have obtained grants, but those are just a small segment of the 74 miles of roads that we maintain that are actually eligible for those types of grants. We've also received grants for technical assistance in our pavement evaluation study that was performed about 5 years ago. Recently, we've had a little more success with some grant funding. It's been a priority to the village board. It's part of their strategic plan. It's part of my individual goals as a village administrator is to seek grant funding. And as all of the department head and the leadership team knows, we are laser focused on trying to obtain as much of that as possible, given the challenges the community is facing. So some of those other grants have been identified up there. Congressman Raja secured funding for us for stormwater. We were recently awarded a grant for a pedestrian bridge project, bridging Metra train station to our downtown. We have some other grant applications in the hopper with different agencies and other funding requests as both the federal and state governments are going through their budget process. But there are limitations to those grant funds. You know, those grant funds don't give us money to repave streets necessarily, to rip and replace sidewalks, to replace streetlights. Those are general maintenance operations that politicians and other programs aren't designed to give us funding for. They like to cut ribbons on nice, bigger, new projects, and the qualifications for a lot of these grants warrant that and require that. So that's why we continue to focus on, we need a local solution still for our infrastructure needs. We used this graphic last meeting as well to kind of show the level of funding required in order to maintain our existing condition of our streets. And you'll kind of see as those lines show, our annual program now is about $1 million, and how much that obtains in resurfacing streets. I'm sorry, I can't read the slide from here very well, but so in order to kind of keep our streets in good condition and the investment necessary as it shows up there, we need to at least double our annual spend in order to keep pace with the overall decline in our road condition. And that's kind of the number and our focus for our goal of needing that funding is to align with the green kind of colored lines up there in order to keep pace with the condition of our roads, in order to improve the overall condition of our roads. That's where I stop and I turn it over to the mayor.
Thank you so much, Jason. So we'll stop here again for questions. So again, streets and sidewalks are funded by utility tax and a statewide tax on motor fuel and not on property taxes. And our current funding for streets is about half of what it should be. So going back to that chart that Jason showed us, if we continue to fund our streets the way that we have, or even we try to double that funding, we're still going to see degradation in the quality of our roads over the next 2 to 3 years. By going doubling it plus, we can actually start to maintain our current status. And then if we go over that, we can actually see an improvement in overall quality of roads. So again, if you have a question, please raise your hand. We'll get you the microphone.
Actually, I've got 2 questions. Doesn't the village have a 50-50 program on sidewalks?
So the village did have that program. It was discontinued and we have not brought it back recently. I don't know if Kristen, do you want to add anything more to that at this point in time? It's something that we did bring back the 50-50 on street trees, but I think sometimes depending on what we were doing, we were seeing sometimes that, you know, a resident might want a sidewalk square replaced. It really didn't need to. And so our money wasn't getting allocated to the worst state of sidewalks
Mm.
instead in that case. And so in some sense, it kind of was like a pay to bump me up in the priority process versus actually helping us strategically address the areas that were in a state of decline, if that makes sense.
Because I know that when I do a lot of walking, and I know some of the sidewalks in my neighborhood could definitely be used, need work on there. I think the 50-50 program may not be something you may want to reconsider again.
Yeah, I think it's a great suggestion. We can bring that back to the board as well. And at the end, if you give us, we know where you live, but Sherry, not too creepy. Volunteer extraordinaire and VIP, our favorite VIP, but we can double check what zone you're in actually though, from a sidewalk replacement plan, because as we mentioned earlier, we evaluate each of those zones kind of we rotate them throughout the year so we can see where you're at in the evaluation cycle. So.
And then the second question is, what's this Irving Park Road pedestrian bridge project?
So as a part of the strategic plan or the comprehensive plan back in 2016, one of the ideas was we have some connectivity issues between the metro station and our downtown. Probably one of the travesties, but from a engineering and a site availability things, one of the mistakes we made was we moved the train station away from the heart of our downtown, but there's no parking. So we didn't really have a choice in that. Our hands were kind of tied, but it creates this disjointedness, and also for pedestrians or bicyclists, it's kind of unsafe to travel across Irving Park Road, and that light can sometimes be difficult to cross at given the intersection. So one of the ideas there was to do a pedestrian bridge. One of the things that we found with grants, as Jason I think highlighted, is sometimes the things that we need to do, we don't get any funding for. It's these big, exciting projects that sound really good to a state legislator, to someone in Congress to be like, yes, I want to put my name on this project because that's going to be a huge big deal. So we kind of identified this as something that would definitely be helpful for the village. But if we don't have the money to do it, we weren't going to do this kind of a project. So fortunately, we were successful in securing this grant. We'd probably need to put some money, but it'd be a very small fraction compared to the total cost of that. And so that bridge would essentially take you from the metro station over Irving Park, almost running parallel currently to the train bridge, and drop you kind of behind the Legion, essentially. So that's something that it's going to take us years to do engineering work and whatnot. But that was a huge win for us. And I think that's where we're showing how we can get more bang for our buck instead of just focusing on what we might want the money for, but we're not going to get it for. Let's even get some money for a project that we would love to do, but we don't have the funding or the flexibility to do that. And that's a good example of one of those.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Let's get you on the microphone, Tony, if you don't mind.
Is there a layout of where they're going to go?
Very preliminary. So we'll have a lot of future meetings where you can give us your feedback on it. And we want to make that bridge pretty because it's going to be something that everyone's going to see. So I'll take your architecture notes on the side. Any other questions? All right. Well, then we're going to move to the next session. So Jason and I are going to tag team this one. So we've talked through kind of what do we have from a village that we need to maintain. We talked about the programs or the shortfalls that we have, and we talked about how we currently fund these. So the only natural place to go here is what are our tools to help increase infrastructure funding to support this? And so going back to this graphic at the beginning, again, property taxes are not a solution for this. We're not going to increase property taxes and suddenly be able to fund all these things, nor would we want to, because that's not what that's meant for. What we're looking at really are how can we better utilize or how can we improve upon our current utility taxes, the capital improvement surcharge or CIS fee that's on your water bill, or a motor fuel tax. And so going back and again, summarizing the things we've discussed in the first forum as well as what we've discussed here, from a wastewater treatment perspective, we know we have $80 million we need to spend over the next 8 years. We're not going to spend that kind of money in cash. We're going to take out loans. That's the responsible thing to do. We need to find $4.5 million annually to cover the payment of those loans. And so that is one part of the equation for as we start to figure out how do we get the money. 4.5 million. The other thing is we talked about streets. So we know we need to more than double our streets budget to maintain or improve our streets. That's another 1.5 million that we need. So right now, what we're targeting is we need about 6 million in additional revenue annually in order to solve and address these growing concerns that we have as a community. This would not only take care of the sewer treatment plants that we have to reduce phosphorus discharge into the streams, as well as take care of expansion of our sewer treatment plants, because we're getting to a point where we have a good problem. This community has grown, but we don't have enough capacity to treat the sewage that's being treated in our community. When that happens, that's not a good problem that we want to deal with. And we want to make sure our streets are still good, right? You don't want to be driving to go to a shop or a restaurant and hit a pothole. It's going to degrade the safety in our communities, and we want to make sure we have good walkable sidewalks. So with that $6 million, how are we going to get there? That's where we want your help. So there's three main areas, and we're going to dive into each of these. And so I think each option has its nuances. Some of these options the village board could move with today. Two of these options require you as voters to make that decision and decide at the ballot what you'd like to do or not. We want to put this all on the table because these are the tools available to us. We want to be very transparent and allow the community to make a logical decision over the coming months. So that way you're educated, you can discuss, debate, and we can come to the best solution for Roselle. This is really a bottom-up solution and not a top-down from the board. So the first one is we could use user fees and utility tax increases today. We could increase the CIS fee, which I know everyone loves their water bill so much today. You just want to pay more, I'm sure. And this would just require board action and be done at a board meeting. There's something called a non-home rule sales tax that would be imposed at a 1% level, and we would grow this from taxing both residents and visitors, anyone who does business within the village. This would require voter action at a future election. And the last option is obtaining home rule status via referendum. This would allow the village board to not only use a sales tax, but use other things like a motor fuel tax imposed at a local level to generate revenue, not only from residents, but again, from visitors as well. That would also require resident action via a referendum at a future election. So I'm going to turn over to Jason now to walk through each of these options and what those mean.
Thank you, David. As David spoke about, kind of the first option there is the one that the village board could do at a future board meeting. It's not probably the most desirable option, but it's the option available necessary in order to meet that $4.5 million mark that has to be met in order to fulfill those mandates at our treatment plants. That's the doubling or tripling, depending on really the cost of borrowing money to do these projects of the CIS fee. As noted up there, kind of the average homeowner pays $300 a year, and that could go up to $600 or $900 a year alone just for the CIS. Additionally, the electric tax by state law, we have a maximum limit that we can approve through a local ordinance. We're not at that maximum limit. So kind of the difference between the current rate and the maximum rate would equate to $90,000. The vehicle stickers, those cost of those are set by local ordinance. So the village board could approve to increase that to really any rate it wants to, albeit for illustrative purposes, we're showing it going up $10. And what that captures an additional revenue of about $130,000. And then there's a municipal utility tax, which under state law, a municipality can approve through a local ordinance, and that's a tax on the water bill. So we're taxing your water, and that's what the value of that is. I think it shows that all of those fees are paid by residents. Those are all on the backs of users of the water system, of users of electricity in town, those who have vehicles in town, versus some of these other options that kind of broaden the base across more than just residents to capture even additional revenue. And that option two is that non-home rule sales tax. That's a sales tax by state law that can be no greater than 1%. It would have to be approved by voters at an election. The 1% is the maximum, and that gets roughly the $3.5 million for infrastructure. By state law, a non-home rule sales tax has limited use and primarily is required to be spent on infrastructure. I think the main thing is it can't be spent on operations. So that's, for illustrative purposes, showing that entire 1% going towards infrastructure necessary to for the wastewater treatment plants particularly. Some of the kind of the upside to that for a resident may be that it's being shared by others. Visitors in town, people who spend money in town would be paying this tax. And being at 1%, it's 25 cents for every dollar. 25 cents for every $25. Unfortunately, it doesn't get us to that $6 million mark. It really only touches the wastewater piece. It doesn't touch the streets piece and some of the other capital needs that we feel and know that this village needs. So that kind of then dovetails into the third option, which is home rule. Home rule by state constitution is automatically towns are granted it if you have a population of 25,000. You can also lose it if you fall below 25,000. But the vast majority of communities that are home rule obtain it through a referendum. The difference kind of between home rule and non-home rule is really the tool, in my opinion, the tools in the toolbox of your elected officials to address local issues. It takes that control out of Springfield and brings it to Roselle. And I think that's a significant and important highlight of the distinction between home rule and non-home rule, and allowing your local elected officials to address your issues. And I feel kind of the fairest way of doing that. And so through that, you can impose a home rule sales tax that has no cap. So it could be something more than 1%. Unlike the non-home rule, it can only be a maximum of 1%. And that's kind of the one option. Also from a home rule, if borrowing money, you typically get a lower interest rate on that because of your ability to ensure that you'll make those bond payments. Kind of the finance world looks more favorably upon home rule municipality, and in return, you have lower borrowing costs. We've used this slide in the past, and it shows every community basically touching Roselle is a home rule municipality. So this is kind of illustrate those communities, what they are imposing as a sales tax, a motor fuel tax, and an eating, drinking establishment tax. So it compares Roselle to our neighbors. And as it shows, every community, including Itasca, who's not home rule, have an additional sales tax in place. From motor fuel, only a home rule municipality may do that in DuPage County. So that would be potential way to get greater funding towards street program is through a local motor fuel tax and eating, drinking tax. Roselle does have that, but comparing to other communities as well. What those rates mean as far as tax figures, you can see up here how much their home rule, or in the case of Itasca, non-home rule sales tax generates in additional sales tax revenue for those communities. As we've spoke about, from a 1% perspective, Roselle would be about 3.5 million, but we'll kind of talk more about other options. Is it still me? Okay. So additionally with home rule, that in addition to that greater flexibility that the board has to address local issues, some of those scenarios of imposing a local gas tax at 3 cents per gallon, imposing a sales tax at greater than 1%, at 1.5%, starts to get this community closer to that $6 million mark. With that, I'll turn it over to the mayor.
So going through those options, and real quick, before we jump to the comparison, how many people shop outside of Roselle today? Do you shop in one of these communities? Just show of hands. Everyone's hand should go up. So you're paying for those community streets, their sewer treatment plants. You're taking care of their infrastructure today. And I think what we're saying is we're probably at a little bit of a competitive disadvantage because we can spread this burden out across a broader group of people than just our community to make our community a lot better and stronger from an infrastructure perspective. And so we went through all these different options, and they have different strengths, different weaknesses. But I think the key thing is we're not at a crisis point today. We have time to think, educate our neighbors, talk about it, hear your feedback, so we can make a right decision for this community and not just make a quick decision because we need to solve a problem tomorrow. We have some time on our side. And so unlike other issues like we've had, like during the recession in 2008, when we had to make a lot of rash decisions as a community, we have a luxury of having a great dialogue with the community to figure out what is going to be the right step for us to take. So going back to option one, we can see through increasing the CIS fee and using other revenue mechanisms we have today, like vehicle stickers, though not ideal, we could use those. We can come up with enough money to cover our wastewater updates. And we could probably secure a couple thousand, 100,000 for streets, but we're never going to be able to fill that gap entirely, just given the revenue opportunities there. If we were to pursue a non-home rule sales tax alone, we could make up a vast majority of the wastewater treatment plants and spread that burden, not just on residents, but on other people who come and use the Roselle amenities. And we wouldn't necessarily be able to cover any of the streets or sidewalks, but in conjunction with the user fees, we could probably make other increases to help kind of do a hybrid approach here. And then finally, with home rule status, with kind of filler numbers as it is, we could completely fund the wastewater updates and substantially increase our streets and sidewalk budget, though not completely to the levels that we project that we need. But again, we can supplement with other fees, other increases that we have control over in order to fill that gap. So if we were to look at this again, you can kind of see this distilled down into different actions and what those require. That first option, the village board can take action at any village board meeting and pass it by a simple majority in order to enact that. When we look at non-home rule and home rule status, those all require voters, residents to make that decision and to approve that before the board can take any action. I think it's also worth stating that a lot of these things, especially home rule, there's a lot of information out there and there can be sometimes fear mongering because it does open up a lot of possibilities for the community. Beyond funding, it gives us a lot of other tools, like we could do crime-free housing, require apartments to do background checks, require cameras and other things like that for our safety. But the board can also curtail or limit some of its authority. So while it would give the board greater flexibility to do things like increase property taxes, we don't need increased property taxes today for these reasons. So the board could elect to take away some of its authority that it would get granted under home rule. So there's things that we can do if that's a concern that comes down the road as well. So with that being the case, we've kind of gone through all of our content. And we've made really good time. So we want to open it up for our last time for any questions that you may have. And it could be on any section, or if you have any questions in general about infrastructure and funding, we'd be happy to answer those tonight.
Me again.
How's it going, Terry?
On the home rule status, you're talking about a 2 to 4 cents a gallon gas tax, and it says it can't be implemented without home rule. What's to stop somebody from? I mean, explain that to me as far as the gas tax.
Yeah. So with only a home rule community can implement their own gas tax by state law. So what we get right now is administered through the state of Illinois. They set a tax rate and they disperse the funds to us. Kind of like the LGDF dollars that we talked about earlier that come through income tax dollars, the state has complete control over that. So while we've been lucky, the state could technically say, we're going to reduce your share of the motor fuel tax that we collect because we need to fund other projects for the state and not you. So that's a funding source that every community gets from the state that's distributed based on a formula. This would be one that's only paid at Roselle pumps and would only come back to Roselle. And you can implement this at a 1 cent threshold. For our illustrative purposes, all this is theoretical, but 2 to 4 based on our funding needs would be what would the board would be considering.
But what would stop people from saying, well, you know what, I'm going to go to Bloomingdale and buy gas here or whatever?
Nothing, right? And I think that's happening today. And I think going back to the chart we had earlier, you're paying a gas tax in a lot of these communities already today. And I would argue, so if you want to go to Bloomingdale, great, you're already paying a 2 cent gas tax per gallon there today. Carroll Stream, 4 cents. Glendale Heights, 4. Schaumburg, 3. And I think what we see more often is you buy gas for 2 reasons. You're price sensitive, and I'm guilty of it. I go to Costco, okay? Or you're in an emergency situation. I'm also guilty of that. I'm running my car down to empty. I need gas today. I'm going to the BP station because I need to get gas to get to the next station. So I think we know we have a lot of money that comes through our gas stations. We see that information. So that's why we can project that. There's always going to be people who are going to use our gas stations. And so I don't think most consumers really even compare the tax rates that they're getting. And the gas prices are so variable based on geographic location that it probably wouldn't be felt by the consumer terribly much.
What about the sales tax? Or you say revenue from visitors? That one, you can increase it at 0.25. How far can you increase it?
So you can, so with a non-home rule sales tax, you can do it in 0.25% increments up to 1%. The difference with non-home rule versus home rule is for a non-home rule sales tax, you, the voters, every time it changes, you have to vote on it and approve it. For a home rule sales tax, the board has that authority to change it in quarter increments. We also wouldn't have to be held to the 1% cap. We could go up higher above that. Now, obviously, there's give and take, right? We don't want to create a disadvantaged situation for our businesses in town. So that's where, again, looking at what our needs are, we project that, we would recommend probably somewhere in the range of a 1.25 to 1.5% sales tax makes sense. The other thing is like the board with home rule can change this, right? With non-home rule, we need to decrease that amount because maybe bids come back lower or we're able to, secure a grant. We have to go back to you to reduce it. With home rule, and I know you're going to say, well, what's the politician that actually lowered tax rates ever? But technically the board could say, you know what? We finished this project, our costs have gone down. The board could elect to move that tax down or at least have a community conversation about what should we allocate that money towards. So there's a little bit more flexibility in how we adjust that rate. It also works on the flip side. Inflation gets really bad, right? And it goes from an $80 million project to a $100 million project. The board could increase it as well.
Thanks.
Other questions?
So I just wanted to say that I think the home rule status taxes are probably better. I think overall if they have like good revenue, and I think like what you're talking about earlier and how it's kind of like seen other communities in the area are already doing it, so it wouldn't be felt that much is true, and they're also easier to implement because they're user fees, and that also like somewhat incentivizes people to use cars less, which is good overall. But yeah, I think that part's good. And then also like not taxing people for water, which is like obviously essential. People need to drink water and use water daily. Same with electricity. So I think it's obviously it's difficult to like balance everything together, but definitely the ones on the further right side seem more appealing overall, in my opinion.
No, thank you so much for your opinion and sharing that with us. I think there's a lot of flexibility we have with home rule that allows us to adjust our strategy, but also we know that there's a lot of things that from a policy perspective, the village, frequently asks for relief on, right? And by shifting cost away from a resident-based system like we have been for so long, we've been very proud of our roots as a bedroom community. That also means you as a resident are bearing the brunt of all that cost, right? We don't have we have a great vibrant business community, but it's a small business community, right? And so we can then shift some of this burden away from our residents, and then we could open up different conversations that are just non-starters today. I know everyone would love to get rid of vehicle stickers. Problem is that's a huge funding source for us to deal with our infrastructure. If we have other tools that we can use that provide us funding for these types of projects, then we don't need to be reliant on those types of mechanisms as we have been in the past. So this opens up a lot of different conversations to allow us to explore how do we fund the village again, going back to that sustainability piece, what's going to be the best way for us moving forward that's going to be a lower cost model to still help us meet our funding needs. So
I have one more question. Would it be possible for whenever the referendum, if there was one on non-home rule, home rule, for there to be like a cap for what the board could approve an increase on? Like could it be like a cap, like a 2% or 1.5%?
Yep. So those are all things I think what we're doing. So we had our first forum in March. This is kind of an encore with a slight twist right now. We're continuing to get public feedback. We'll post this so that others who couldn't make it are able to view and whatnot. You'll all be receiving a survey too. So you can either fill it out here and give it to us on paper, or if you want to do it digitally, you're more than welcome to do that. We're collecting a lot of community input. We're going to have a presentation to the board in June to discuss all three options and how they would want to go about doing it. So we can put together real numbers before the public. Our intention is to have at least 2 more public forums. And those next public forums are going to be more focused on the financing side. This is what the board would want to do. And to your point, what are the restrictions or the burden the board wants to put on itself? We could require new taxes to be passed at a higher rate. It could take a 2/3 vote instead of a simple majority. We could do different things like different public notices. There's a lot of things the board can consider. And that's for them as a kind of a legislative body to discuss. And that's our next step, actually. And we plan to come back to that, to the community before we make any decisions. But I think our intention is to make sure all 3 of these are on the table. So that way the community can decide ultimately what would be the right choice. So whether it's voting for a non-home rule, voting for home rule status, or we could pass a CIS rate schedule that would go out, 5-6 years that would slowly incrementally get us up to the levels we need to be at. So, any other questions? Well, I appreciate everyone coming out tonight. I know this is the first place you all wanted to go on a nice summer night like this, especially the last day, I think, for school for Lake Park. So really appreciate you participating. You coming out here is really important, but share this information with your neighbors. Continue to engage with us. As I alluded to just earlier, we're going to have more public forums coming up here, and we're going to focus more on the financing piece. So a lot more to come. But thank you so much. We're really appreciating your feedback. A lot of this content was modified based on feedback we received from those of you who attended our first forum. So thank you for those of you who came back again. And those of you who are new, thank you for joining us today. And we're looking forward to continuing to engage with you throughout the year. So take care.